The wound is smaller than a dime. The quarantine zone covers 3 Texas counties. Dr. Elena Reyes first sees the mark beneath the jaw of a dead heifer outside McAllen. The skin has been shaved into a neat oval with a shallow cut at its center. There is no torn flesh, no crushed bone, and no sign that a large predator entered the pasture. Yet blood has dried in a thin line down the animal's neck. The rancher assumes the heifer bled to death. Elena knows the wound is too small. She takes a brain sample to the state laboratory. The result changes the map of North America. Rabies virus associated with the common vampire bat. For years, wildlife officials have watched Desmodus rotundus move closer to the United States through Mexico. The species has been documented within roughly 50 kilometers of the South Texas border, and climate models have identified possible routes into the country. Surveillance teams have inspected livestock for characteristic wounds, trained veterinarians, and prepared for a line everyone knew might eventually be crossed. Now it has been. But one infected cow does not prove that vampire bats live in Texas. The animal could have been transported after exposure in Mexico. A single bat could have wandered north and died. The difference between an isolated incursion and a breeding population will determine whether the event ends with one investigation or begins a new era of livestock disease. Elena returns to the ranch before sunset and waits beside the herd. The common vampire bat does not attack like the monster its name suggests. It is small enough to fit in a person's hand. Its coat is brown-gray, its face compact, its wings ordinary at first glance. It does not transform, hypnotize its prey, or drain a cow dry in one feeding. Its real adaptations are quieter. Vampire bats often land near a resting mammal, rather than crash directly onto it. Strong forelimbs and specialized thumbs allow them to move across the ground with surprising agility. Heat-sensitive structures around the nose help identify places where warm blood flows close to the skin. Sharp incisors remove a small patch of tissue, while anticoagulants in the saliva keep blood flowing. The bat laps the blood. It does not suck through hollow fangs. For a healthy cow, the amount taken during one feeding is usually not the central threat. Repeated wounds can contribute to blood loss, stress, damaged hides, infection, and reduced productivity. The larger danger enters through saliva. Rabies does not need a dramatic bite. An infected vampire bat can expose cattle, horses, goats, wildlife, pets, and occasionally people. Once clinical rabies develops, the disease is almost invariably fatal. A steer may first appear isolated or unusually quiet. Later, it may stagger, drool, become hypersensitive, show weakness, or lose the ability to swallow. Those signs can resemble other illnesses, placing ranch workers and veterinarians in danger before anyone realizes they are handling a rabid animal. That is why Elena does not simply count dead cattle. She reconstructs contact. Who touched the heifer? Who placed a hand inside its mouth? Which dogs approached the body? Were the other cattle vaccinated? Did anyone wake with an unexplained cut? Every answer creates another phone call, another medical consultation, another decision about post-exposure treatment. The first confirmed case becomes a human emergency without a single human being bitten by a bat. After darkness settles, thermal cameras reveal movement near the herd. A small shape lands behind a cow, disappears beneath the body, then returns to the air. Another circles the water tank. A third crosses the screen. The ranch does not have one visitor. It has a feeding group. At first light, wildlife officers search culverts, hollow trees, abandoned buildings, wells, and bridges. South Texas offers more shelter than outsiders imagine. Limestone cavities, dense thorn scrub, drainage structures, ranch outbuildings, and warm spaces created by infrastructure. Livestock provide predictable meals across the landscape. Climate remains the main barrier. Common vampire bats are vulnerable to prolonged cold, and cannot simply occupy every part of Texas. A mild winter may permit movement north, but one severe freeze can kill exposed animals or erase a new colony. Their expansion would likely begin in the warmer south, remain uneven, and follow pockets of suitable roosts and abundant mammals. That pattern makes the invasion difficult to recognize. There is no solid front advancing across the map. One colony may persist beside the Rio Grande, while another fails farther north. A bat may travel along a river corridor, feed at a ranch, then retreat south. Trucks moving livestock can carry exposed animals away from the location where infection occurred, producing rabies cases that appear ahead of the bats themselves. Elena's investigation finds the roost beneath an abandoned railroad bridge. The ceiling is crowded with bats, but most are native insect-eating species. Texas supports a remarkable diversity of bats that consume enormous numbers of insects and contribute to healthy ecosystems. In the darkness, a frightened public will not distinguish those animals from vampires. The first viral video proves it. A ranch worker posts footage of dozens of bats leaving a highway overpass under the caption, "They're here." The animals are harmless, free-tailed bats. The correction reaches a fraction of the original audience. Within days, people burn a small roost, seal occupied structures, and place poison near cave entrances. The response begins killing the wrong bats. That secondary crisis could become more damaging than the first colony. Native bats reproduce slowly and may gather in large numbers at vulnerable sites. Destroying them removes insect predators, harms protected wildlife, and still does nothing to stop vampire bats using separate shelters. Authorities therefore face a communication problem as urgent as the biological one. Tell the public too little, and ranchers miss wounds or handle rabid livestock without protection. Tell the story carelessly, and fear turns every bat in Texas into a target. Elena becomes the reluctant voice of the response. At livestock meetings, she holds up two photographs, one of the oval feeding wound and one of an ordinary puncture or scrape. She tells ranchers not to diagnose from an image alone. Report suspicious wounds, isolate animals showing neurological signs, avoid bare-handed contact with saliva. Keep livestock vaccination current where officials recommend it. Never handle bats, alive or dead. Most importantly, she explains that seeing a bat does not mean seeing a vampire bat. The advice slows panic. It does not stop the virus. A second ranch reports a horse that cannot swallow. A calf is found with a fresh wound near its shoulder. Genetic analysis links the new rabies samples closely enough to suggest local transmission, rather than unrelated imported cases. The evidence now points toward more than wandering individuals. Vampire bats have established at least one breeding colony in Texas. Their social behavior makes that colony resilient. A bat that fails to feed cannot survive long without blood, but successful individuals may regurgitate food for hungry roost mates with whom they share strong relationships. Grooming reinforces those bonds. The colony can support members through short periods of failure, allowing individuals to survive long enough to try again. The same intimacy can move pathogens and control agents through the group. In parts of Latin America, captured vampire bats have been treated with anticoagulant compounds and released. Because roost mates groom one another, the substance can spread within the colony. The method can reduce local numbers, but it is not a magical solution. It requires correct species identification, careful dosing, repeated surveillance, and protection of non-target bats. Remove one colony without changing the surrounding conditions, and another may eventually occupy the empty roost. Some researchers favor vaccination strategies, protecting livestock directly and exploring ways to immunize bats against rabies. Vaccination does not prevent feeding wounds, but it can sever the connection between a bite and a fatal livestock outbreak. Compared with searching every cave and culvert, Creating immunity in the animals most likely to be exposed may be the more realistic defense. The Texas response begins with rings rather than walls. Around each confirmed site, teams inspect livestock, collect samples, survey roosts, and raise vaccination coverage. Markets flag animals arriving with suspicious wounds or neurological signs. Veterinarians receive updated guidance. Wildlife officers coordinate across the Mexican border because a flying mammal cannot be managed by one jurisdiction pretending the other side of the river does not exist. For several months, the strategy works. Confirmed cases remain concentrated in the south. Winter approaches. Officials hope cold weather will do what traps and vaccines cannot: stop the population before it spreads. Then, Texas experiences an unusually mild season. The bats continue feeding. A colony relocates from the exposed bridge into an unused utility tunnel where temperature fluctuates less. Cattle gather near winter feed, concentrating meals. Instead of collapsing, the population enters spring with enough surviving females to reproduce. This is how range expansion becomes permanent, not through a giant swarm crossing the Rio Grande, but through a sequence of winters that fail to kill enough animals. Ranch economics begin to change long before Texas becomes overrun. Vaccination costs rise. Animals must be inspected more frequently. Suspected cases trigger testing, quarantines, and lost time. Export partners ask for documentation. Small ranches feel each expense more sharply than industrial operations. The projected damage is measured in millions, not the instant collapse of the Texas cattle industry. That distinction matters. Exaggerating the threat makes the scenario easier to dismiss. The realistic version is slower. Recurring losses, permanent surveillance, and a new disease management cost added to drought, feed prices, storms, and existing wildlife pressures. For families working cattle, however, one rabid animal is not an abstraction. Elena visits a ranch where a teenage boy bottle-fed a sick calf before anyone suspected rabies. He remembers saliva running across a crack in his hand. Doctors begin post-exposure treatment because waiting for symptoms is not an option. His family watches the calendar even after being told that timely prevention is highly effective. The calf dies. The boy does not. That survival becomes the most important lesson of the outbreak. Vampire bats do not make rabies unstoppable. Awareness, vaccination, exposure assessment, and rapid medical treatment can break the chain. But control creates an ecological paradox. If officials target every suspected roost aggressively, they risk destroying native bat populations. If they protect all roosts without identifying vampire bats, they allow the reservoir to grow. If they focus only on livestock vaccination, feeding wounds and wildlife transmission continue. Every strategy solves one part of the problem and leaves another exposed. Wild mammals complicate the map further. Vampire bats can feed on deer, feral hogs, and other mammals, creating pathways outside fenced herds. A rabies program built only around cattle may miss transmission moving through wildlife. At the same time, a wound on a deer does not prove a statewide epidemic. Surveillance must resist both complacency and panic. The human risk would also remain uneven. Vampire bats generally prefer accessible, large mammals where livestock are abundant. Human feeding does occur, particularly where people sleep in open structures and bats have few alternatives. But Texas would not become a landscape where suburban families are attacked nightly in sealed homes. The highest risk would fall on people whose work brings them into contact with bats or potentially infected animals. Ranchers, veterinarians, wildlife staff, laboratory workers, and anyone entering roosts. Rural homes with unscreened openings could face additional exposure. The danger is real precisely because it is specific, not universal. As summer returns, Elena receives a report from north of the original surveillance ring. 3 cows have fresh wounds, but laboratory tests find no rabies. Thermal cameras identify a single vampire bat feeding among them. The animal is captured and fitted with a tiny transmitter. Instead of flying south, it leads researchers to a warm equipment building shared with native bats. The colony contains only a few vampires, including a pregnant female. There are now two fronts, the virus and the species carrying it. They do not always move together. That discovery changes policy. Texas can no longer wait for a rabid cow to reveal every colony. Teams must look for feeding wounds before disease appears, trace bat movement, preserve native species, and maintain public trust across a region where many people depend on livestock for their income. Years later, the common vampire bat has not conquered Texas. Hard freezes still push the population south. Control programs remove colonies. Vaccination prevents many livestock deaths. Native predators, limited roosts, and climate slow expansion. But eradication repeatedly falls one colony short. The bats become a permanent southern border management problem, rare enough that most Texans never see one, consequential enough that ranchers can never ignore the possibility. Each mild winter expands the surveillance map. Each hard freeze contracts it. The boundary breathes with the climate. Elena returns to the first ranch after another cold front. The cattle stand beneath a clear sky, their breath visible in the morning air. Cameras show no feeding activity. The abandoned bridge roost is empty. For the first time in months, the rancher believes the invasion may be over. Then Elena examines a heifer near the water tank. Beneath its jaw is an oval wound smaller than a dime. If vampire bats establish themselves in South Texas, should officials prioritize eliminating the colonies or vaccinating livestock and learning to live with a limited population? Tell us which strategy you believe would protect both ranches and native bats in the comments. Subscribe to What If Animals and watch the next scenario, because sometimes an invasion does not announce itself with a roar. Sometimes it leaves a mark so small that the real danger begins when no one bothers to look.